High Museum. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Greg Harris, the Keogh Family Curator of Photography. The exhibition we're highlighting this evening, Picture in the South, 25 Years, is on view in the Cousins Family Galleries over in the Wheeling Pavilion. If you haven't had a chance to see it, it is on view until February 6th, so slightly more than a week to see it. Major funding for the exhibition is provided by the Henry Luce Foundation, the Forward Arts Foundation, who specifically funded Sheila's commission, and the Philip and Edith Leonian Foundation. The exhibition is made possible by our Premier Exhibition Series sponsor, Delta Airlines, Premier Exhibition Series supporters, Sarah and Jim Kennedy, Louise Sams, and Jerome Rio, Dr. Joan H. Wheaton's estate, and the Wish Foundation. Our Benefactor Exhibition Series supporters, the Ann Koch Chambers Foundation, Robin and Hilton Howell, the Ambassador Exhibition Series supporters, Contributing Exhibition Series supporters, and other generous supporters. Before I introduce our speakers tonight, I'd like to thank the High Museum members for attendance. Your support is invaluable and fuels our mission. If you are not yet a member of the museum and need to renew, please visit high.org at the end of the program. And now to introduce our esteemed guests tonight, Sheila Pree Bright and Dr. Hilary N. Sheila is one of the most recent recipients of the High's Picture in the South Commission. Her contribution to the project of Visible Empire considers the tension between the natural beauty of Georgia's Stone Mountain Park and the site's dark and hateful history. Sheila is a nationally recognized award-winning photographer based just outside Atlanta in Stone Mountain. She earned an MFA in photography from Georgia State University, and in 2006 she received the Center Prize from the Santa Fe Center for Photography for her Suburbia series. Her work has been collected and exhibited throughout the United States, notably at the International Center for Photography and the Harvard Art Museum. Her widely acclaimed monograph, 1960 Now, was published by Chronicle Books in 2018. Dr. Hilary N is Associate Professor of History in the Department of Gender and Race Studies and is co-director of the African American Studies program at the University of Alabama. Dr. N earned her master's degree and doctorate in history from Tufts University and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, respectively. She is the author of Educational Reconstruction, African American Schools in the Urban South, 1865 to 1890, as well as other scholarly publications. Currently, she is working on her second book, which examines how everyday African Americans remembered and commemorated the Civil War. Please join me in welcoming Sheila Pree Bright and Dr. Hilary N.
I know as the images are going to come up on screen, I just want to say, wow. When the Invisible Empire and your work on Stone Mountain, which I'm familiar with as a scholar of history and the messy ways in which the Civil War has been remembered and intentionally forgotten for various political reasons, you made the mountain look beautiful, but beautiful in a different way with the black and white images, new ways of viewing it through the lighting, but also with even the battle flag that's there. And then your other images too that really help me think about your frame as an artist. So I want to start off with Stone Mountain and your use of the landscape in those particular images.
Well, this body of work, the landscapes, was something that came after. For 7 years, I have been on the ground photographing the Black Lives Matter movement. And I didn't realize how traumatized I was actually. And I live right by that mountain, so I'm about like 10 minutes away. And I really wanted to challenge myself as an artist and tackle the landscape at Stone Mountain, because Stone Mountain is one of the largest granites in this country. And also, 4 million people visit that park every year. And it's rooted in the Confederacy, civilism, which is great suffering and inequality, through a popular social movement, which was the KKK up into contemporary times. And I felt that this body of work is really rooted in liberation for me. It's like reclaiming the land. Because when it comes to Black bodies, it's very complex when it comes to the land, and because our ancestors were treated as property.
Yeah, and that really, you're reclaiming of the land by even getting the walkways to go and see this site that you have to look up for. And you scare the people below, but you bring a troubling of that landscape that only a Black photographer and Black gaze can do. By your movements, the shutter of your lens, the lighting of that space, you are reclaiming that landscape and causing people like me and others to think of it anew through new lenses and bringing new meanings, but also new possibilities for moving forward. So I know you talked about you had specific names for some of these images.
Oh, yes, I
Including this one, and bring the cotton.
For me to go on Stone Mountain to see that image with the cotton on the table, how they stylized it, I started thinking about the ancestors and when they were out in the field and coming back, were they allowed to bring cotton and sit it on the table or stylize it? And I thought that was very, very interesting to me with that. And with all of these images, they are Black and white, but I wanted Stone Mountain to look beautiful because that part is beautiful. And I wanted to create an emotion. I wanted to evoke an emotion. Like, I'm not sure, Greg might can help me. Well, the image before, I think I call that rituals or ceremonies because I was started doing a lot of research about the Confederacy, and oh my God, I did not realize a lot. I did not realize that the white women socialites were responsible for bringing all these monuments across the country. I did not realize that as an early age, young kids were taught about the Lost Cause movement, but it was more romanticizing. It wasn't really about slavery. They had essays about, the children had to write essays about the institution of American slavery. They called it American slavery. And one of the, was a young man that written in there, I know you asked me about,
But I think
I can't breathe. That's what it is. It's like, I'm all over the place, but when I see the image, I have to stop and this is called I Can't Breathe. Because when I was on the ground, I started thinking about landscapes are very static to me, and I wanted to tell a narrative. And I wanted to tell the narrative of the Confederacy and what I experienced on the ground.
And I like how you called it I Can't Breathe. It's breathtaking in a way. It can, especially when you stylize even the interior scene of the cotton next to a plate with a fork. Those are the interior lives of the enslaved people who would have picked that cotton, who would have eaten a meal, but yet finding respite in this free space that we don't think about. And we also don't think about what it's like to be an artist, like you were saying, when you saw it, that you couldn't breathe. It took your breath away. It made you pause. And in that pause, you decided to capture that emotion that you felt. And I think that's one of the things that you get with these landscapes like this.
There is a future. Because with all of this work, even though we're talking about what all of us know about this rooted symbolism in this country, there is a future. And I feel that as an artist, I have to reimagine how to live in the future because racism is not going to go anywhere. So,
Yeah, and this in particular, you can see it going into the, like a distance unknown, but a journey that you're continuing to go through into a hope for tomorrow, a place of going, but you're moving forward. You're not going back in time. And that's something that I really thought about these images, but also some of your protest images. In particular, one of the things that I study in my work is how African Americans, from the very beginning of these Confederate monuments being placed by first the Ladies Memorial Associations right after the Civil War, to then what becomes the United Daughters of the Confederacy. And if you read Karen Cox's book, Dixie Daughters or No Common Ground, they call themselves the Daughters. And what they did with these monuments. But from the beginning, even African American children, as they walked by them, would sing John Brown's Body and other spirituals. Sometimes they would say, "You don't speak to me." Sometimes they would vandalize it by throwing rocks at them. Then you have adults who would also speak out. But on Emancipation Day parades and other celebrations, they claimed the streets, whose streets were named after oftentimes Confederate generals, major enslavers, as well as segregationists. But it was a refusal by claiming the streets, their sound of the pavement on those streets, that destruction of air, but also their tears, their voices, in many ways, including this gentleman here, his screams. How are your protest images in a way build upon what you did later with the landscapes by focusing on these movable landscapes? These people.
That's a good question. Now, like I mentioned before, I was really trying about photographing protest images because we in society, we're constantly looking at bodies and we are labeling each other. And I thought that if I take away that and just focus on the landscape, I was, like I said before, I wanted to evoke that feeling with people when they see this imagery here, because I always talk about grave spaces. If we could come together and grave space and really comes to grips with all of this, maybe we can move forward. It's not being romanticizing, but how do we move forward? We're in a pandemic right now. There's a lot going on. I believe that our world, we're in an evolution. We're in a new era. There's a lot of death going on. And I feel when I see these images, even more of the landscapes, I feel that way. And that's why I called it Invisible Empire. It was from an essay that I was reading from W.E.D. Du Bois. It's called Invisible Empire State, or Empire State. And he talked about how Georgia is so beautiful, but so strange and disturbing. And he says, when you have war, these monuments are just, it's just these monuments. For me as a woman, African American, I'm not, a lot of people think I'm from the South. I was born in the South, but I was not raised in the South. And when I came to the South as an adult here in Atlanta, I called my mother and I told her, I said, "Mom, what is going on down here?" She said, "You in the South." And a friend of mine, I don't know if that's him right there, he talked about how landscapes have something, the South has something to say in landscapes, and we never talk about that in relationship to Black bodies.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that comes in powerful line, even having the Bible here on the ground.
Yeah, and that's called the Bible. And this Bible actually is my father's Bible. My father passed in 2010. My mother passed in 2019. And this body of work is very personal to me. They grew up in the Jim Crow era. And my parents, I'm a daughter of a soldier. And my parents did not talk to us about the civil rights movement. I didn't really talk. I learned more being in Atlanta talking to the elders about the movement. And so when I went up to the mountain one day, this is my father's Bible. And when the second coming of the KKK on Thanksgiving Day that evening came up, they read Romans chapter 12, I believe. And so I set the Bible down. I didn't have Romans chapter 12. The wind was blowing a little bit. And when I sat the book down and get ready to take a photograph, that page slowly moved over to chapter 12. Wow. I get emotional, and I said, that's my father speaking to me, because there are so many questions that I would like to ask both of my parents now, because they grew up in that time. And a lot of times when I befriended Mr. Lionel King from the landscape movement, he said, we felt your generation. He said, because we did not talk to you about the movement because we were ashamed. We were killed. We had acid on us, so we were trying, you know how to protect your child. And that's what they were trying to do.
And even with the protecting of the child, one of the things that's striking with these images of Ferguson and others, and especially of the young women, there are children there. There's generations.
I was in Ferguson, yeah. And when I went to Ferguson, I went to the aftermath, and you could feel the tension in the air. You could feel the pain. You could feel the sorrow. And these young kids, it's like this is what they had to experience, and it reminded me of the Children's Crusades in Alabama and what they had to do back then too. So you see all this generational trauma, but that's something that we have, you know.
Well, some might see generational trauma. I see hope.
Oh, yeah.
That even as a child, they have something to say for their future.
Okay.
And one of the most powerful images that you can see back then is the young girl was like, Dr. King's dream, where is that dream here? And it's like, where's my dream? That urging, but also that need to say it, to be heard, to be. And you capture so well in that image, but also others, faces. So the young man who has a tear coming down his face, to the African American woman whose hands are above her head. You can't see what she's holding up, but you can see her anguish and anger in her face, but also that determination for a city that she loves and move forward. Why those decisions to be close up to the faces and bring another dimension to these people who would probably be labeled in the media as hoodlums, protesters, criminals, but you show a rawness and humanity that's missing in those portraiture pieces.
I think with all my work, even with the landscapes, I come from shooting portraits. I love people. I always wonder about people and why they think the way they do. And so with all of my imagery, even with the protest imagery, I look at these as portraits. I don't, when I'm out on the ground, unless just not clicking on the camera, I'm waiting for a moment. And that's what I do when I'm in the landscape. The landscape is really peaceful to go up to that mountain, even though it's rooted in that symbolism. But like you were saying before, it's about painting that space and trying to understand that space, okay? And so let me take it back one minute. So that's how, when I'm out shooting, that's how I think it. Something has to evoke me for that emotion, because I want people to feel my work. And it's really hard to transition from shooting portraiture to landscape. And I love landscape now. I really do. Because like I was saying, this body of work is all rooted in liberation, but it's about moving forward.
And that's something you can see in these.
Yeah.
I see it as landscapes, but people within those landscapes and move into a better tomorrow.
Right.
But also demand to be heard in ways that they're listened to. And you show also too something that I think doesn't really get seen. We think about protest and anger, but this is also a form of love. And you have some Black mothers in those pictures in love for their children, but also love for society that their children can be part of something more. Can you talk some about the portraits of some of the women, including this image in Atlanta?
That image was it's a mural. It's about 30 feet high. It's no longer here, but it was put up, I believe, in 2019. And I wanted to pay homage to the mothers whose children have fallen to police brutality. And I always think about the civil rights movement and Richard Avedon, one of the well-known photographers in the 20th century. He actually came down to Atlanta in the 60s and photographed Julian Bond, his 6-month-old daughter, in the spacesuits. And I said I wanted to create that image with the pictures of the mothers. And so it was actually paying homage to the mothers and about moving forward. And all of my work, even though it might feel like, oh, it's protesting, no, it's about moving forward. Because I feel that if we don't, if we don't use our imagination, we're not going to be able to move forward. And I think artists, especially in this time with the pandemic and everything that's going on globally in the era of George Floyd, I feel that artists are going to pave the way of how to moving forward.
And I think that's what comes out of all these pieces. And you capture something that's not, when we talk about African American history and the Black press, it's usually a phrase that the Black press is the first page of African American history and US history. I feel like with your images, both of landscapes, including this capture of
George Floyd. This was in Decatur Square, where they had a monument. And so, we're in 22, in 20, they actually, from New York, an organization came and projected a hologram onto it of George Floyd. Yes.
Yeah, and that, if I'm not mistaken, did that monument come down?
Yes, it did. It was down. So we have this hologram that's projected onto that building.
And that's what I think this one in particular, like Richmond, Virginia, what happened to the lead base. There's something about artists and reclaiming in this, imagine a new space other than what was there. And to get people to think forward that maybe this monument doesn't have to stay here all the time. Maybe it's not set in stone. But also too, these people who are navigating spaces had a part of that change that happened too. Where do you see yourself as a photographer in capturing this moment and for future generations like myself as a historian who's going to document this down the road? Where do you see yourself as providing the front page and the first word of history?
Well, the past and the present always coexist. And I think we as artists, me as a photographer, is using this imagery to teach. And it's seen through the eyes of a Black narrative, okay? And it's telling our stories. And so I feel that it's very important to start. I think a lot of times it's hard for us to change. It's like we're in this pandemic right now, and we're being forced to change whether we like it or not, right? And so when I think we have to find, I think I'm going off, I'm not probably answering your question. I'm thinking about the inner child and how me have to start with young people at the age of 3 to start teaching these narratives to them. And I see all of my work, through all of my bodies of work, as a common thread. I'm really talking about universal commonality amongst all of us.
And that's what comes clear is that intergenerational teaching. The mothers with the young children, the Julian Bond image with his daughter, and Julian Bond's father, who's a well-known African-American scholar of Alabama history, and his work's still being cited, that generational passage of knowledge. And rooted in the land.
This is breathing.
And that land
Yes. Yeah.
that's not always acknowledged.
Yeah. And so I know people are probably wondering and want to ask the question about what should we do with these monuments. I feel that they need to be in a museum so we can teach.
You know, as I tell people all the time, whatever the community decides.
Yeah.
But I do know for me, in fact, you'll see a picture of me at the very end here with me standing. My campus, that's me June 8th, 2020. The next picture is me a week later. That boulder was removed. That was UA's Confederate boulder. And I've taught that boulder since I got there. And I became part of this history of this monument being removed. The plaque that I'm touching on top that's missing, that is in our archive. I just took my students over and we saw it. The boulder itself will be on display at a new museum that they're putting, but contextualized with the Jim Crow campus of UA. Before authoring Lucy 1956 uprising on the campus and before George Wallace. They're going to do that contextualizing moment. But I also respect the communities decide not to put it in the museum and do something else. But wherever the community decides, after those long, hard conversations to move forward, that's what we have to respect. And as a historian who's used to seeing Black memory destroyed, highways going through it, cemeteries made into parking lots, I always say everyone needs a seat at that table. And the community move together, but in a healing space and one of love. And this is where I think your photography shows one of love, one of healing. And how might we bring these images to start having those painful conversations of what to do with these monuments? But I do know a large number of them are going to go into museums, and as a historian, like, contextualize this.
You can contextualize.
Teach this, but then also have this photography around it and create new meaning around it.
Yeah. And I didn't talk about the other images that are Polaroids. My process for me to go and shoot landscapes, because I said landscapes for me are very static, I felt that shooting Polaroids would inform me how to think and feel about shooting the landscapes. Because when you see the Polaroids, they're very invisible, like very, very dreamy, and it actually is the topic of like the invisible empire. And I feel that the Polaroids really, what am I trying to say, bounce off each other. That's not the right word. With the black and white images of the Polaroids, they coincide and exist together. You know, it's like it's disappearing. Like we're getting ready to. I know that there's another organization. Stone Mountain is owned by the state, but there's another organization or company that's taken it over, and they talk about building a museum and retelling the narrative with that, you know. So I think that would be a good thing to do.
Yeah, and that's one of the things too. You can recontextualize, you can add new, you can remove. But one of the things I always say, you need to teach. If there's no teaching component to it, it's easy to say there's a fear, well, we removed the monument as if nothing happened. And another type of erasure and pretending that it didn't exist. And I feel like that's been a lot of the history that you're showing here, that these people don't exist. Because it doesn't fit a certain narrative. So how do we make sure that these lines, something here, and this is my favorite picture. The young girl that
that was a Juneteenth celebration. And you see the girl, I believe it's, I guess it's the grandmother. And it's so interesting in the young man. And then you have the Ferris wheel. I keep talking about that play and innocence and child. I think all of us need to get back to our inner self as a child and be open and free with that. I think that's very important.
And for me, one of the things I always think about this and just the long history starting in the 19th century on to the present is sometimes Black children, Black girls aren't allowed to be children. And the juxtaposition of play with family. How do we bring back that play and innocence and dreams? And what is her future? But I know one thing that's shaping her future is that we'll be driving that car.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know if people have any questions, but I want to leave you first with this, if I can remember, if you can help me with it. Malcolm X talked about the land, and he says, revolution is based on the land. And land is based on all
Independence.
All independence. And land is based on freedom, equality, and justice. Because it's really about the land. And that's what we're globally fighting, is the land.
And one of the things you show, even with your protest pictures in Stone Mountain, Invisible Empire, the land and people of the land are a way to move it forward. So I know there's probably questions.
Anybody have any questions?
This is where it gets hard because I cannot see what that logo over there.
Yeah, I can't see that right. That's why I'm seeing like this.
I was wondering if you've ever visited Kennesaw Mountain, because I lived in that area, and I find myself when I visit, I love taking pictures and doing it in different lighting and adjusting filters and things of that nature. And I just think that a place that's so beautiful to walk and spend time with your family and teach them about appreciating nature is also a place where so many people have lost their lives, and this is where battles are happening for us to really fight this freedom. So just wondering, like, what your thoughts maybe about Kennesaw Mountain Park as well, in addition to Stone Mountain.
I think for me, with this body of work, it's a reckoning for me. It's for me to move forward, to talk about Black futures. It's talk about, like I said, reimagine. I would leave that for somebody else to tackle, you know? Because if you think about, when I think about Georgia and all the research that I'm doing, the land is the land of living dirt. That's my next body of work.
Have a question, Raven?
You mentioned the relationship between the Polaroid pictures and the landscapes. When I saw the exhibition, I was really struck by that board of Polaroid pictures. I found them quite captivating. And I wonder if you could say a little bit more about how the Polaroids function in your artistic thinking and how you use them. Whether you think of them as studies for something to come, or as they appear upstairs, they eventually become sort of autonomous works themselves, or what's their place?
For me, it was a process that I was going through, like I said earlier, about how to inform myself on how to shoot the landscape, because the landscape is very static. But once I brought them in to let Greg see them, they were like, oh wow, we gotta put those in the show. So I think it was part of the process, but now what has happened to me is I'm shooting a lot more Polaroids, and I'm incorporating that into the work now. And it's something about the way that it looks, the way that it feels. Because within all of my work, I just don't want you to look at the images. I want you to hear the images.
Hi, thank you for sharing so much about your work today.
Thank you.
You talked in the beginning about a bit about the you not realizing how traumatized you were from the work. So I wanted to ask you, how do you grapple with the emotional labor that also comes with this work and digging into these histories? How do you care for yourself as a Black person doing this type of work?
You know what? I'm fortunate for the pandemic because it slowed me down. And it's making me think more about me, my family, and about the land, and about how I feel that when it comes to self-care, I think that's what you're talking about, is to look within and look at myself more and my family. So it taught me a lesson, because I know that when I had photographed the protest for 7 years, my husband was telling me that I need to stop. I'm thinking I'm dying. And I know the last time he didn't want me to go by myself, and I'm usually by myself because I don't want him with me. You know, and we drove to Baton Rouge, and we stopped in New Orleans. This is a funny story. And we got to the hotel. My camera bag was on the bed, and I ran out the hotel, and I said, "Have no fear." He's looking at me. This girl is crazy, okay? And so I felt then that I was on a plane, off the plane. I felt like I had to continue this, but didn't realize that I was very traumatized until the end of 2017. And I felt that I had to do something about it and take care of myself. And for me to transition over to the landscape has helped me. Even though photographing has helped me, it's like I'm transitioning from this body of work and want to talk about the future. I want to talk more about the reimagination of that, because if not, it will drive me crazy.
And I'm personally glad that you are taking care of yourself, because I want to see more. We need you more, so please focus more on yourself.
Hi, I just want to go back to the Polaroids and your landscapes. You know, just in information, a couple of the black and white landscapes, the train tracks. And
Speak up, I can't hear.
I'm sorry. Is this better?
Yeah, that's good.
Oh,
It's just a
the landscapes, the train tracks, and then Stone Mountain. And then there's the rotation into the Polaroids. And you said that sort of the landscapes are static, but the Polaroids, to me, just seem to have movement in them.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering, what was your process of, I don't know, is there manipulation in the Polaroids, or how did you capture?
No, it's no manipulation. It's the settings that I put it on. I bought an old SX70 camera, and they they built an adapter that you could place where they used to place the flash. I could change my shutter speeds, okay? Just like on the cameras, for the blurry image, for the movement, that kind of way. Now, keep in mind, I could have did that with the black and whites, but I was thinking something totally different with that. So I think both of them inform each other to see that. I think it would really be nice to really blow those Polaroids up, you know, in places. So like I said, I'm shooting a lot of Polaroids now. A lot of Polaroids now along with my new work.
Hello.
Hi.
Okay.
Over here. Okay. The light is shining in the eye, okay?
Yeah, I'm in the exact wrong position. I really appreciate what you were saying about the photograph as a place of like intersectional learning and coming together in a form of education. And your photographs have been on the sides of buildings downtown and behind museum. I was wondering about how you approach making space through photographs and where they end up for this educational process.
How these photographs, you know what, a lot of my work, when you talk about the education in the space, and when I think about my work, a lot of it is in the classroom with secondary, even higher level learning. And so I'm in the process because schools are calling me to make curriculums for my work. And they're talking about, you know, visual literacy and talk it through with my imagery from all of my bodies of work. And actually, I'm in the process of doing the children's work too. So that's how it's going right now. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hi.
Hi.
So I'm from Stone Mountain also. I grew up there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Good. I have to talk to you.
Yeah. I'd love to. And looking at the Polaroids and then the pictures that you took afterwards, I was thinking about how my understanding of Stone Mountain was like blurry, like those Polaroids. And you know, the area full of black people.
Right.
All black people, grew up around all black people.
Right.
And so I'm kind of curious, did your perception of Stone Mountain, the area, change at all? Like, did you have any sort of I don't know, how does that work to talk to actually where you live?
You know what? When I first came to Atlanta, I have to tell you this story. My husband and I heard about Stone Mountain, but not a lot. And we were like, we ain't never gonna live in Stone Mountain. Never.
My parents said the same thing.
We're in Stone Mountain, and I really didn't start visiting that Stone Mountain until after 2017. And so you're asking me, do I have a different frame of thinking about it? When you're in that space, for me as an African American, and you see this large stone with the edge of the Confederacy in there, and then you see the image of the Confederate flag, like I told you, it makes me think about our ancestors, my parents, but I have to deal with the psychology of it and trauma and try to claim it and move forward. Because like I said before, racism is not going to go anywhere.
Can I just add for Stone Mountain, my physics, I rather talk to the people around it until I saw your picture of it. I'm gonna go back now, because for me, it was a haunted space. I was like, no, I do not want to see Jefferson Davis, Stonewall Jackson, and Robert E. Lee looking at me all the time. And I'm a historian, and I deal with slavery and civil wars. I deal with a lot of images, but there's something about that space. But the way you captured it there, and then the Polaroids, I'm going back to new eyes, and new opening. And I think if anything, that helps get me to change my perception of that space and willing to go back and engage with it after a very early experience where I wasn't wanting to go back.
Hi, I have a question. I'm not sure if it's going to come out by the way, so I'm going to think out loud as I ask you this question. And it's related to something that you just shared over there, because you talked about trauma and you talked about healing. And one of the main ways that I am not an artist, I'm a social and behavioral scientist. But one of the ways that I think very much about coming out of trauma, about dealing with trauma, is through joy, is through celebration, it's through smiling, it's through all of that. And as I look at all of these images, the images very much show, I see sadness, right? I see struggle, I see strength as well. And I was just wondering, in all of the photos that you took and in your work in general, if and how you capture, or you even see in the images, capturing a level of joy and of celebration and of Blackness made together that helps in some way, shape, or form address trauma. Does that make sense?
Yeah. This is the reality, okay? And for me, I say that if we always talk about love, but I feel that if you don't see the love in this, there's no beauty or justice at all. And so that's why, like I said, this invisible empire is rooted in liberation for me, okay? And for me to move forward, because my new body work is going to be talking about the Black future, because we know this, but we have to move on.
Hey, first of all, it's just been great to hear everyone's thoughts and really just learn. On that picture of Romans chapters 12, oh sorry, over here.
Okay, I can't.
In that picture of Romans chapters 12 and 13, it's just, first of all, was that taken on Stone Mountain?
Yeah, that's in Stone. I took my father's Bible and placed it on the granite, yes.
It's just incredible to see it look. And I know Paul in Corinthians talks about love, and Romans a lot talk about community. And I think you both mentioned the need for like love as a solution. I would just like to hear more about that photo and kind of the inspiration for it.
Oh, okay, I thought I mentioned it. If anybody could pull up Romans chapter 12, I think they're talking about love as the brethren, okay, of them coming together. But for me, I don't know what possessed me to want to take my father's Bible on the mountain. And I think it was because my parents are no longer here, and they grew up in the Jim Crow era. I think about them a lot. And as these young children growing up in that era, I think about John Lewis. And when I did a lot of research about the second coming of the KKK on Stone Mountain on Thanksgiving, I felt that I wanted to bring that Bible up there and photograph that. And it was kind of like my parents and then the Confederacy, blending those two things in together. And when I placed that Bible down and the page moved slowly to Romans chapter 12, I was like, oh my God, I feel that my father was speaking to me. And my father was the type of man, based on what my mother was telling me. They grew up in a little town called Waycross, Georgia. And he grew up in Jim Crow era, but he was very vocal. He didn't care who you were. And they had to get him out of town. So he was a very vocal person. And I think that's where I got that from, through imagery, because I'm very shy, believe it or not. And I speak through my photographs.
Hello.
Hi.
First of all, thank you for your work. You spoke about erasure of the history and the intentional, forgetfulness of the things that have happened in these spaces. For myself, as a child going to Stone Mountain, my family would go to see a laser light show. In the summer over those Confederate faces etched in stone, and as a teenager, it was just a place to hide. We climbed the mountain. Have you considered exploring other spaces here in Georgia, knowing that you've come here as an adult, other places that have been contextualized, like Lake Lanier, for instance, like a place where kids go, they slide down slides, families are there during the summer for 4th of July. Ironically, have you considered exploring some of the other spaces in the South that might just have something to say?
You know, like I told the young lady before, I might want to leave it to somebody else. I'm trying to reimagine and moving forward with all of this because it's a lot, it's traumatizing to me. And I was down in Monroe, Georgia, didn't know anything about Monroe, Georgia, and I found out about 4 lynchings that were there. That's what I was talking about. It's land of blood and dirt. And I want to talk about something else now. I want to move forward. We gotta understand our past, okay? But I think we have to move forward. If not, we're gonna stay in the sunken hole. But we do have to understand our past.
So you talk with such enthusiasm about the land. It seems as though palpable excitement to get to grips with this. And if you're talking about the future, what's your strategy? And talk a little bit about what direction you're going in to try to make that work.
I don't really have a strategy. I have to go what comes from what I feel. And right now, I have a body of work called The Land of Blood and Dirt, and it's about Black farmers. I want to talk about that, but it's going to be how I shoot it, like I did with the landscapes in Stone Mountain. I'm trying to evoke something with Black farmers and in the environment and food. And so that's where I'm moving into right now, but it's about the land. And it's about generational wealth too. Because what I was telling you about with Malcolm X is really about the land. And especially right now with the pandemic going on,